Help! Somebody calm yourself, please. Touch my inside. Try to fix you so that you may fight for.
So if you don't know what Warhammer 40k is, and you've never heard of it, what rock have you been hiding under? Have you been in Saddam's hole again? Have you just been released from Vault 101? Have you had any internet access since your mommy and daddy took it away because she was looking up Five Nights at Freddy's Rule 34? Well, initially, I didn't know much about it either, and I would love to fill Chica's USB port. Anyway, Warhammer is something I've always been interested in, and something I've wanted to dive into, but I've always been so intimidated by just the colossal size of the Warhammer universe. And many others wanting to get into the Warhammer community feel the same way. Because the Bible is good and all, but I'm pretty sure the lore around the Warhammer universe dwarfs it 100-folds over just by its mere size. Because this baby has a lot of content, but it's been on my list of things to talk about, even though I don't know everything about Warhammer. Because I thought it would be interesting to dive headfirst into, and start doing research from the perspective of someone that is completely new to Warhammer and wants to get into it, but are cripplingly afraid of how big it is to attempt such a feat. But if you don't know what Warhammer 40k is, me and you can hold hands and explore it together. Why are your hands sticky? But first I have to rip off the band-aid and lube up my porthole, because I know if I get a single sentence wrong, the Warhammer community will rip up my asshole. So much so it can be considered corpse starch. See, we're already making references here. I already feel part of the community. But this is going to be a very, 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 very basic outline of the Warhammer lore and what it is. So that you can run off and go find out more, and get depressed learning about all the tragic and absolutely gruesome stories Warhammer has to offer. Which makes it such a good franchise. I'd recommend watching Warhammer and Astartes Anonymous, both of which I've been watching their shorts for a while, and made me want to attempt jumping into the Warhammer franchise once again. But anyway, what is Warhammer 40k? Well, it comes in many forms. It's a tabletop game.
We're playing 40k.
Don't you want to get some bitches over here?
Where some of the figures are expensive, and some people have entire armies they have all hand-painted, one by one. There are games such as Warhammer 40k, Space Marine, which I played as a kid. The multiplayer was pretty good, but I had no idea there was an entire lore behind Warhammer at that moment. There is Dark Tide, which has a soundtrack, which almost sounds like a direct rival of the Doom soundtrack. There is an animated series and multiple fan animations which are just absolutely chef's kiss in terms of animation. And multiple novels, by that I mean probably an entire library's worth. But basically, Warhammer is a science fantasy set around 38,000 years in the future, where humans are constantly in a fight with aliens and other species, and most importantly, each other. But the most recognisable part of Warhammer 40k is the Space Marines. Every gym rat's wet dream of a physique they so desperately need. But Space Marines are most recognised by the Blue Space Marines and their armour, and the Blue Space Marines are a chapter called the Ultramarines. A Space Marine chapter is basically small sections of all Space Marines with their own name, history and colour scheme. Now I said small section of all Space Marines because there are 1,000 chapters with 1,000 Space Marines in each chapter. Some being the same and some being very different. My favourite is the Salamanders. Because yes, I'm a basic bitch. But these chapters usually have a leader called a chapter master, who most of the time is the strongest within the chapter, and usually organises and commands the chapter. Now, Space Marines are genetically modified. Sorry gym rats, hop on the anabolic steroids. These dudes ain't natty. But they are bred to protect humanity. I mean, most of the time. It's not unheard of for certain chapters to slaughter civilians and guardsmen simply just for seeing them. Or some idiot guardsman picked up a glowing weapon they shouldn't have. But Space Marines are stronger, smarter, and
I'm better! I am better!
They have 3 lungs, which makes your average chain smoker look up in envy. 2 hearts. They are around 8 feet tall, so your average E-boy has already been thwarted. And some can live for entire decades or even thousands of years. or even longer if they haven't already been entombed into a walking war machine, if they were mortally wounded and unlucky enough not to die on the battlefield. Because then they plug you into a sarcophagus with more firepower than an Abrams tank. Most of the time you have no quality of life, you're just a nugget inside a big ass war machine, most of the time still feeling the pain from your wounds and pumped full of drugs. To the point where if you don't die on the battlefield, you'll die from insanity. Now there is a hierarchy within the Space Marines and humanity in general, and wouldn't you be glad to know most humans are insignificant compared to the Space Marines, even if you are an Imperial Guard, which are humans that aren't genetically modified, and are on the front lines to face the absolute behemoths that dare go against the Imperium of man. And the average lifespan of an Imperial Guard is 15 hours. 15 hours. A piece of bread has a longer lifespan than you, but they are essentially used on the front lines as cannon fodder, or the first to face the enemy. Because humanity is so overpopulated and they outnumber Space Marines by a mile, no Space Marines really care about them dying except for maybe the salamanders, and they are used like pawns. The beauty of being a normal human in the 40k universe, where if you don't die on a battlefield, you live in an overcrowded, hollowed out planet that has been ravished by technology and human advancement to the point where food is very scarce. But let's say you live in one of these massive overcrowded cities and you're hungry. And unfortunately, your neighbour just died. So now you're thinking, fuck, I'm hungry, now I have to go to a funeral, I'm in a calorie deficit so I can't shit on his grave, and I'm gonna have to show my condolences to the family. Well, no you don't, because his body is taken away, put on an assembly line, chopped up by psychopaths who have slowly lost their sanity from doing this for so many years, and your neighbour's meaty goodness is compressed into corpse starch. So not only now can you hate your neighbour, you can also eat them. And the same thing is going to happen to you. This is not only used in the cities, it is also used on the front lines by the guardsmen. Aren't you just loving the Warhammer 40k universe? I am. Because that is the first inch of the iceberg in terms of breaking Geneva Conventions and horrific morbid tales that would probably keep anybody awake up at night, with interest obviously. But at the top of the hierarchy of the Imperium of Man is the Emperor. He is basically the leader of humanity, and without him humanity wouldn't be this technologically advanced. And to some he is revered to be a god. Not like Imperial Japan or anything. Holy shit, it's a lot like Imperial Japan with Hirohito. Now, the Emperor is this beautiful, majestic, intelligent... He's basically Stephen Hawking at this point. He's confined to a golden throne that is basically his life support, which runs on about 1,000 sacrifices a day just to maintain him, all whilst being protected by the Adeptus Custodes, who are complete badasses and have mastered almost all forms of combat. But it is fair to say the Emperor is not what he used to be. His body has deteriorated, but how did one of the most powerful beings in the Warhammer universe become like this? Well, it's a long story. But just to bastardize it, the Emperor was created when a bunch of shamans on Earth saw that an impending doom was coming. So they all game-ended themselves, and all their spirits and power pulled together and gathered in a newly born child who had mortal parents. These parents were completely normal humans, but unknowingly were the parents of the saviour of mankind, the Emperor. Now this was around 8000 BC, and the Warhammer universe is in the current year of 40,999. So the Emperor basically walked around when Jesus was walking around. But he realised his powers at a young age and knew what he had to do. He had to save the whole of humanity. But initially he guarded humanity from the shadows, basically playing roles that were not of a leader but would push people in the direction he wanted for the purpose of humanity. And obviously the Emperor did not wither to age, so he did this for multiple generations until he would eventually come out from obscurity and the shadows and become the Emperor of mankind. Now the Emperor has 20 children. These are called Primarchs. And no, the Emperor is not a semen dispenser. They were made genetically in a lab with his DNA and his childhood friend's DNA, who apparently can live as long as he can. And yes, the childhood friend actually won for once. The only time ever the childhood friend ever gets the main character. Sorry to all the female best friends in every romance anime, but these Primarchs were separated from the Emperor and scattered throughout the universe. Now it's not known if this was intentional or unintentional, but there are 3 theories of what happened, and one has not been confirmed because it was classified. One, this was done by the Emperor to sort of give depth to their character, and they wouldn't be aristocratic assholes, because most of them, when they were scattered, landed on human settlements on different planets. 2, this was done by the childhood friend that was the mother of them, because she did not like the intentions of the Emperor. And 3, it was done by the Chaos Gods. Now, the Chaos Gods have a raging hate boner for humanity, but they are a lot to talk about, and I already know some of you are confused. Hey! Wakey wakey, motherfucker. I know I don't have Subway surfers on the bottom, and I know you haven't been professionally diagnosed with ADHD yet, you absolute idiot. Why can't you listen? Just listen for once in your life. No one ever listens to you, I know. I hate you. But anyway, nobody knows why the Primarchs were scattered, but the Emperor would go looking for them whilst he was doing his other objective, which was the Great Crusade to unite humanity. And he eventually did find them and used their DNA to create the Space Marine Legions. Now, Primarchs would fight wars for and against humanity, with the Horus Heresy being one against humanity. Horus being one of the Primarchs and starting a civil war between loyalists for the Emperor and the ones against the Emperor. This would lead to the death of Primarchs on each side and the mortal injury of the Emperor, because when he was fighting Horus, his son, and probably after watching A Pursuit to Happiness, hesitated in killing his own son, so Horus would wipe the floor with him, but eventually the Emperor had enough and killed him. But with having so many wounds, he had to confine himself to the Golden Throne, and his body has deteriorated over time. But the throne is keeping him alive so he can keep the webway functioning. The webway is basically a protected highway in the warp where the Chaos Gods are, and is a faster way of moving ships around. Obviously, moving ships around where there are gods that hate you, you would need protection from these Chaos Gods and their demons, so the Emperor from his chair is basically keeping the webway open and protected. But to maintain himself and the webway, it requires a lot of sacrifices, which is 1,000 psychers a day, and these psychers get their powers from the warp, so they can do things like pyromagic and telepathy. So basically your Skyrim mage build, and it's because of their powers they are a good energy source for the Emperor. So basically, bad spawn, bad genetics, GG, next game.
Your life is everything. You serve all purpose. You should kill yourself now.
You're going to be used as sloppy gruel to fill the old man's mouth. So that is basically the Imperium of mankind. But what about other factions? Well, as always in Warhammer, there are a lot. But to keep this brief and not overload that tiny noodle of yours, we're only going to talk about 2 real quick. First is Chaos, which is ruled by the 4 Chaos Gods, whose names I'm not even going to attempt to pronounce. But basically the bodies of Chaos want to cause chaos and want to get access to everything outside of the warp, so they can increase their power and influence. And most people can succumb to Chaos, and can sort of come possessed by it. And even Space Marines can, which are the Chaos Marines. And even Horus succumbed to it, because the Chaos Gods twisted his emotions, which is why we have the Horus Heresy, where he went against his own father. But once again, that is the tip of the iceberg with Chaos. But the next faction I want to talk about is very much the comedic relief in the very, very dark Warhammer universe. And for some reason, they made their comedic relief sound and look like your average Brit. And that is the Orks. Now, the Orks are very special in the Warhammer universe. Not because they're void of brain cells, like your average Cocomelon viewer. One, because they can't technically be stopped. All of them are asexual, meaning they do not have reproductive organs, and are all the same gender, but go by the pronoun the boys. But they are all technically like mushrooms. When they die or when they're just walking around, they release spores, which burrow beneath the ground and start making more orcs. You cannot get rid of them. They are a pebble in your foreskin. A cockroach with fire resistance. Once they're on your planet, they're staying there, unless you want to glass the entirety of your own planet. But in Orc society, the biggest orc is always the leader. Yes, they are like cavemen, and you have a whole variety of different orcs, like the Gretchen, who are just like little goblins, and the Slugger Boys, who are just massive. Now, why are they the comedic relief? And why would I want to talk about them instead of every other faction? Well, they love fighting to the point where if they don't fight, they get physically ill. And they are the most idiotic to the point where they travel through the warp, full of demons by the way, unprotected and with the windows open because they love a good brawl and entertainment. And they also have a special power they don't know how to use, where if they believe it works, it will work. For example, they believe red paint makes their vehicles go faster. red paint now does make their vehicles go faster. Another example is that when a guardsman picks up their weapons, they can't operate them because they shouldn't be working. They make no sense. But because they believe they would work and would expect them to work how they want them to, they just do. It's like they're all Make-A-Wish kids. So they believe their gun could fire nukes the size of 10 Fat Mans or 10 Nagasakis, then I'm pretty sure they would have won the war a long time ago. But then again, they are so stupid, they don't know they have this power. So that is why they are the comedic relief and one of the best factions. But anyway, that has been the very bone basics of the Warhammer universe, and some of the lore. And this has been my tiny adventure going through all the research, and my understanding as a beginner. Warhammer is a great franchise, and it is so story rich, I don't think you could ever get bored of it. I would recommend watching some long form videos on some of the lore, it is quite interesting, and in general just jumping into it. I mean, Henry Cavill's a fan of it, so you won't look like a nerd, and he's attractive, so there's your incentive. But anyway, I gotta lube up my ass because the Warhammer fans are gonna come for me. I might have got just a small part wrong, or shat on the Emperor just a bit too much. But yeah, bye bye.